Yep, from the other. Cool. All right, so welcome to Aftercamp. Kind of a pop-up meeting this time. So our regular meetup is in 2 weeks. So we're going to cover Docker and Kubernetes. We're going to cover that really from like a conceptual level too. Like I feel like Docker and Kubernetes is like a really weird set of ideas if you're coming from it from the dev side. When really it's more like an IT side sort of thing. So I'm really excited about that session to demystify that. So Aftercamp itself, that is a meetup that Rachel and I started. Rachel and I have both worked in the bootcamp space for quite a bit of time. And one of the biggest things that we saw is that, support's awesome going through. Hey, Michael, support is awesome going through the program, but typically post-graduation, you're kind of like, got to figure out what's next. And sometimes that's, up to the first place you land a job. They can kind of define your growth and direction. But definitely the things that we noticed that there's like a good set of core things you can study to really get stabilized in the development industry. And so we're starting as a meetup. We're working on some additional resources and whatnot. But so this meetup is all about AWS, and Michael, our presenter, is here. Let me get you presentation ability. Oh my gosh, where'd you go? There you are. I still like your microphone and your backdrop. All right, I am changing the host over to you, Michael. And with that, we have Michael from AWS presenting on full stack development using AWS. Take it away, sir.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Scott. And thanks everybody for being here tonight. Glad you all could make it. We have a lot to go through. So I'm actually going to jump right in. A couple of expectations right off the bat. I know we're recording already, but just something I wanted to put out in front of everybody. Feel free to keep this interactive. This is going to be a lot of fun. If you have questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. I'll check it periodically. There's going to be some points where it just makes more sense to look at the chat at those points. But if something's urgent and you think, I might skip it, feel free to go ahead and unmute and let me know whatever it is that you have to say. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and have me start sharing my screen here. Thanks for giving me permissions there, Scott. I'm not big on slides, but I got a couple here for us today. As long as I can figure out how to get Zoom out of the way. Haha. No, first screen. Awesome. So Scott gave a brief introduction on what we're talking about today and what we're going to be going through. Hopefully you all know why you're here. This is full stack serverless development. And in particular, we're going to be talking about AWS Amplify. Now, AWS Amplify is going to be a suite of products that we cover as we go across this journey, but I'll be the one introducing that along the way. So you know my name by now, Michael Liendo. I'm a senior developer advocate over at AWS, and I just realized I threw out a ton of jargon just now. Developer advocate, serverless, AWS Amplify. Some of you might be new to the cloud. There's a lot to discuss here. Let me go and break down what it is that I do. As a developer advocate, AWS essentially sponsors me to create content for the community. Now, that's obviously in hopes that I help share the knowledge on AWS Amplify, which is one of their products and services that they like to share throughout the community. But that doesn't limit me to them. In fact, if I wanted to, this would be a bit on the edgy side, but if I wanted to, there's nothing stopping me from creating content on any of our other cloud competition or using different serverless frameworks along the way. It's perfectly up to me. It's just that they trust my voice and my presentation style, and that I can lend myself to best suit the community. So let's talk about the cloud for just a little bit to bring everybody up to speed, because when I first started, granted, I'm self-taught. I never actually went to a boot camp, but I started on the front end side of things. And this was pretty much me day in, day out, where I was a scientist. I had my headphones on, like grooving to the music. And I'm just like centering divs. Bootstrap was big back then. jQuery was all the rage. And then there was this scary Kraken in the background known as the backend that I just didn't touch. I was completely oblivious to it. But as time went on and you have to level up and get a little bit better, you find your niche, things become more pressing that you slowly venture your way over there. Now, in the land of boot camps, oftentimes that's in the form of MongoDB or Heroku or any of those other amazing platform providers out there. But in a nutshell, they're all essentially their own flavor of cloud providers. Now, Heroku is really cool because they actually use AWS under the hood. And MongoDB, they're also awesome. They're open source and they have this really fantastic database that you can take advantage of to get you up and running. SQL, all those different flavors, it's great. But where do you start? And does it really happen to be that we have to stitch all these services together? Well, spoiler alert, that's actually not the case. So before we dive too deep into it, I did want to share just a little bit more about me. This is me over in Mississippi. I was having a great time down there, just speaking on more serverless stuff, front-end stuff, and culture altogether. That's usually what I like to rave about. But you can also find me outside of the cloud space, typically teaching front-end development. I was a serverless consultant for some time. I got my kiddos. They actually might make a couple appearances. Mom went out to the grocery store, so that means they like to come and bug dad when I'm giving a presentation. But you can find me all over the place. I blog, I YouTube. Really, if there's a place on the internet for me, I try to be there. Okay, so today's agenda. We're going to talk about a couple of things here, but I really do want to make sure we have a solid grasp on what AWS is. So Amazon Web Services. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about a couple of recommended services that you as bootcamp grads or just dabblers in the tech space might want to get familiar with if you happen to lean towards AWS. We'll also talk about how do you get set up with this. And then, of course, I always like to finish strong with the demo. All right, so when it comes to AWS, let's go ahead and just do a quick little 10,000-foot overview of what we mean here. Ideally, it's split up into a bunch of regions and availability zones. A region is really just any kind of geographic place in the world. Because when you send information over to AWS, we're going to go ahead and say, oh, you told me to go ahead and put it somewhere in North Virginia. Well, let me go ahead and spread it out across different zones, just in case one of those data centers go down. And in fact, that actually happened recently where we had customers deploy code in Sydney over here in the bottom right, and a shark bit through one of the cords underwater. So fortunately, we had a full-on incident report about it. We had to explain to customers like, sorry, that was out of our control. But your information is still intact because we deployed to multiple data centers within that specific region. It's just crazy the kind of things that you come up with when you work on a global scale. But when we talk about global scale, our customers have a bunch of different ideas and plans on how they can scale up their business. And AWS definitely likes to champion any way that we can accommodate them and their needs. So these are half of the over 200 services that we now have at AWS. Everything from compute, blockchain, IoT, stuff for front-end developers, stuff for folks that want to work on satellites, like actual satellites pulling down all the telemetry data that comes from them, databases, etc. We try to have our customers covered, and we're always listening to them. So that list is always growing. But what ended up happening is we heard from our customers that there was a gap. We did a fantastic job of covering the infrastructure engineers, the DevOps folks. We did a great job of handling backend infrastructure. But it seemed like there was always a missing segment when it came to front-end developers until, about 2.5 years ago. And so now what I want to do is just say, if you're a developer and you're thinking about dabbling in AWS, you're in the right spot because AWS is for front-end developers. In particular, we came out with a bunch of different services that try to encapsulate the main things that front-end developers need. And we still give you the ability to look into other AWS services as well. So we present a command line interface for folks that are used to working with command lines. We recognize that some of our customers, being front-end developers, want to integrate with UI components, and they don't want to have to rebuild the same components, because at the end of the day, if you have to build another login screen, it doesn't really add all that much value to your application. Really, it's typically whatever is behind that login screen, which is the valuable part. So we build those out for you. We support a bunch of different frameworks and services. We'll get into that in just a moment. But then also things that make the most sense, like hosting. You've seen this done from folks over at Netlify or Vercel. GitHub Pages can also let you host your applications there. But this was typically troublesome for front-end developers to do, again, 3 or so years ago. And then if you don't like the command line interface, or if that's just not your flavor or expertise, we also present a GUI known as the admin UI, which is just what it sounds like. You can click a couple buttons, you are the admin, and you can develop your infrastructure as code that way. All right, so we're going to talk about these 3 today. And all the features that Amplify can cover are pretty much here. I touched base on a couple of these: authentication, machine learning, deployment, and hosting. But we also give you CI/CD out of the box. And if you're unfamiliar with that term, continuous integration, continuous deployment, you can fit such as when you deploy code to GitHub and it kicks off a build for you automatically. That comes for free. You also have the ability to add in automated testing, machine learning, S3 configuration, all this fancy stuff we're going to go ahead and look at. Now, we don't have time to cover everything in this hour that I have with you today. So we're really going to scope it down to these primary methods here. These are really the nuts and bolts. Authentication, that way you don't have to manage your own. API development, databases, deployment, and then also show you how that CI/CD thing works. Okay, so traditionally, you would see something like this. And if you were with us last session, we talked about ARDs and how you can scaffold out your application. This is a very simple graph architecture design that showcases what's known as a 3-tier architecture. It's called 3-tier because you typically have a front-end component, you have an API, and that API is talking to a database. This is great. This encompasses a REST style. So you'll use services like Cognito, API Gateway, Lambda in the orange, and then the database is DynamoDB. Now, getting this set up without Amplify, it would probably take me, someone who is very comfortable in working with this kind of infrastructure, probably an hour, hour and a half. Now, with Amplify, we can get that set up in minutes. But we're actually not going to take this route today. Instead of employing a RESTful service, like this pink one in the middle with API Gateway, we're going to switch it up a little bit. And we're actually going to talk about how we can do this with GraphQL. And you see from the graph here, it actually simplifies things quite a bit. We're still going to have authentication in place. That's going to be done via Cognito. We're still going to have our database. NoSQL database, similar to MongoDB, but in the middle, we have GraphQL. And you'll see what kind of additional functionality we get by using this service. Now, you might have heard of other GraphQL providers, such as Apollo. Prisma has a flavor that integrates very well with other things along the way. But AWS's version is known as AppSync, AWS AppSync. This is going to be a fantastic way that takes out of all of the configuration that we would have to do on our end. It's going to be really cool. With that, I'm going to go ahead and get into the demo, but this will be our first checkpoint for me to see what kind of questions we have currently. If I can find my cursor. Where are you, cursor?
Right now, the only existing question is who did the illustrations?
Thanks. I did them myself, half of them. So I don't know which one exactly you're referring to, but
The Kraken thing in the back, whether that first one was pretty good. Solid.
Those are open art. So it's a combination of me piecing stuff together. Obviously, the ones that look like me are my own creations, and then there's a site that I went to that does all that stuff. Yeah, only in Australia. So let's go ahead and let me get this set up for us. I always forget that you can't see it, but the Zoom thing, Scott, you know, you're always recording.
It's so bad.
Yeah. Okay. I prefer full screen. Let's do that. I'm going to bump this up for us. Hello. Great. I want to start fresh because I want to show you just how easy it is to get started here. Now, as we go through this, I'll talk about what I'm doing along the way, but if you have any questions, of course, go ahead and just let me know. But I want to go and kick off a new React application. So I'll say npx create React app. And this one is going to be called, we'll say like to-do stars. Because yes, I think the best way to showcase all this crazy configuration that we're doing is to keep the front end as simple as possible. But again, feel free to substitute this front end with your own creation, because what I want to showcase is that we can have all these hard to do services and integration points automated for us so that we can really focus on whatever it is our front end is. Now, I spoke on AWS Amplify and that it integrates with front-end frameworks. I want to touch base on that just a little bit more. When I say front-end frameworks, I really do mean anything that could be on the front end. So we have JavaScript libraries in place. That's going to give us the ability to integrate with React, vanilla JavaScript, Vue, Next.js, but even off of just the web, you can also integrate with mobile applications. So React Native, Flutter, iOS, in particular Swift. Those come just from our amazing team that likes to configure this and make it easier for front-end developers' lives. So this is React doing its thing. Let me go ahead and CD into this. Stars. And we'll open this up in VS Code. Get out of the terminal. Oh, it opened up on the bottom. There we go. Okay. Faces, but I got to put you on my second monitor. All right, so we have this in place, and let's go ahead and take a peek at what we have here, because it's a very basic React application. We have a header, paragraph tags, anchor tags. That's awesome. Thanks for giving it to me. I'm actually going to get rid of it. I think if we're adding a to-do application, we probably need, first and foremost, a header. And we can say something like meetup to-dos. After that, we will likely have to have the ability for a to-do to be added. So I'll add a button here. And we'll say something like add to-do. Now, the main part of our application, just being a little semantic here with HTML5, we'll have a main tag. And inside of here, we can have a, let's say, a single article for now. We're obviously going to have many to-dos, but inside of this article tag, we'll have a to-do title. Stub this out for us. And then in addition, we'll have a paragraph tag, which is going to be our to-do description. Now, so far, this is regular React. This is me being in my flow of creating front-end code, doing my front-end thing. But now that we have this in place, I'm going to be a little bit more semantic before I start this up and we see what this looks like on the web. Let's just go ahead and name this container. We'll be good citizens here. For this button, we'll add a class name. And we'll just call that something like add to do button. Maybe. This would be our to-do list. And really, I'm just applying this for styling. To-do list. And then our actual to-do is going to be here. Great. So I have that taken care of. And if we fire this up in the browser, we can say npm start. Oh my goodness, I can't see it because it's in the way. I hope that was a start script. Okay, it was. And as a lot of you might be familiar with, this is just going to give us a very bare bones application here. There we go. So we have meetup to-dos, we have our button to add them, a title and a description, nothing fancy. Let's go ahead and make it super fancy. What I'm going to leave you with at the end of this meetup is the ability to share this, check out the CSS, and essentially do whatever it is that you're wanting to do to this application. Now, let me start by grabbing that CSS here. So here's our meetup. And I'm really just gonna pull this in. Whoops, wrong repo. There we go. I believe this is you. It is not. That's okay. I'll make sure that you don't have to write your own CSS because I'm not the best when it comes to that. I'm like, install a library, we're done. What I want to go ahead and showcase from here is how we can use Amplify and get that integrated into our application. So the very first thing I'm going to do, and the very first thing that you'll do on your end, is install the CLI. Let me open up a new terminal, and I'll say npm i-g. And the CLI is at AWS Amplify /CLI. This is going to give us the ability to run Amplify commands within our terminal, but really it's just going to be a wrapper around however you would use the AWS CLI, or if you were to jump into the AWS console. It's just a very nice front-end developer focused way of interacting with AWS. Because again, what we realize from talking to our customers is that we speak different languages, front-end and back-end developers. Back-end developers might say something like, hey, I need to stand up an S3 bucket, so that way I can put my static assets in there. Front-end developers are like, yeah, I just need to host my code. So the Amplify CLI uses that approach. If you want to host your application on the web, you literally say Amplify Add Hosting. And if you want to go ahead and add an API to your application, you literally want to say Amplify Add API. So let me go ahead and do just that. The very first thing we're going to do is add in an API. As I mentioned, the command is Amplify Add API. And this is where you can prepare to have your minds blown, because I forgot to initialize the project. Amplify init is the very first thing we want to do here. But I promise I will make more mistakes. So we have Amplify init in place, and it's like, hey, cool, I'm Amplify, welcome. What's the name of your project? I think to do stars is going to be great for us. Just in case you can't see that, there you go. Do you want to initialize your project with the above configuration? Because I looked at your package.json and I noticed that you have some things that I know about. Some of those things are going to be, are you in VS Code right now? And it looks like you're not just in JavaScript, but you're in a React application. And not just React, it looks like Create React app. So your directory path is probably going to be from source. And I'm like, yeah, thank you. That was very nice of you, Amplify. I'll hit enter here. Let's go. All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and just get this scaffolded out real quick. And I'm going to be using a service known as AWS Cloud Formation to do so. But you need permissions to do that. So do you already have an AWS profile, or do you have some secret keys to give me? Now, in my case, I already have my AWS profile set up. But if you didn't, the CLI, by running the command amplify configure, actually walks you through that entire process of getting an AWS account configured. Now, I'll say profile. It picks up the profiles that I have on my local machine. And then it goes off and it does its thing. It's going to take my app, not deploy everything. It's really just going to create this container, because I'm going to be adding a bunch of services to it. So through the use of AWS Cloud Formation, it's really just stubbing this out for me. It's only taking a couple of seconds. And once it's done, we can begin adding more services. Awesome. So we got that taken care of. And the very next thing it says is, all right, pro tip, Amplify Add API. I'm going to go ahead and do just that. Amplify Add API comes in two flavors. We have GraphQL and we also have REST. In previous episodes, I've used REST, and as I promised, I have my first interruption. How are you? Can you close the door, please? Thank you. He's 3, so he kind of runs the house. So we're going to be using GraphQL in this case. GraphQL, what is the name of the API that we're using? I think to-do stars works perfectly fine. And it's like, awesome. Well, for this, if you want public access, we can just secure it with an API key. It'll be a public API key, no big deal. Or you can actually integrate with Cognito or IAM roles, which we're not going to talk about, or OpenID Connect. We're actually going to talk about Cognito user pools today. If you've used Auth0, Firebase Auth, Active Directory, Cognito is very much so in that vein. It's going to give us a place to have different groups of users. We can give them different permissions, but really it's this kind of pool, as the name suggests, where we can just put all of our users in it. I'm going to hit enter there, and it does give me the option to add in things like Google sign-in, Facebook sign-in, of course, Amazon sign-in, and then you also can get things like Apple sign-in as well if you were to go with a social provider. I'm actually going to stick with the default configuration here. And then it's going to ask me if I want, how I want my users to sign in. Email, username, phone numbers even. I think email is fine for now. There's no advanced settings that I want, but if I did, I can configure things like how strong do you want your password? Or what characters are valid in a password? Or even better, after somebody signs in, do you want to fire off some kind of function so that way something happens in your application? I think we're good here. Ask Noah.
No, I just laid out for you.
Ask Noah, please. Thank you. So we went ahead and got this taken care of. We don't have any advanced settings that we need. So I'm done here. Now, here's where it gets really fun because it's saying, hey, do you have a GraphQL schema that you'd like to use? I don't. All right, well, we have templates made available for you. Single objects such as a to-do application. You can actually model relationships because we're in GraphQL. So blogs can have many posts, posts can have comments, etc. Or really fine-grained access control, meaning I'm an admin, but Scott is able to log into my application. I have different privileges on what I can do with my data than he can. I'm actually going to stick with this very first one, the single object. Now it knows that I'm in VS Code. So it's like, do you want to edit the schema now? And I'm like, yes, yes, I do. And here we are. I'm going to slide this over for now. And we have our very first model. Now, there's a couple of things that you might not be familiar with if you're used to GraphQL or if you're not used to AWS. The first one is that we have this type here. This is really just describing the data that I just created. The cool thing is that this file is completely mine. So I can add more fields to it if I wanted to. I could say, yeah, our to-dos are also going to have tags, which is going to be an array of strings, and it's required, which is this exclamation point. And then we have the additional fields that you would expect. We're not going to have a name. I think a title is better here. Perfect. Now, one of the things that might be weird is this app model. This is what Amplify calls a directive. This essentially enhances what GraphQL gives you out of the box. In our case, this app model says, yeah, take this to do and create a database for me. And since this is a typed graph, I know strings, arrays, etc. Well, go ahead and create all the CRUD operations for me. give you the ability to create, read, update, and delete. And because I actually added Amazon Cognito, go ahead and set all the permissions based off of something. And it doesn't know what that something is because I haven't told it yet. And for that, I want to add in another directive, an Auth Directive. This one takes in a set of rules. Now, as the S implies, this is plural, so it'll follow an array of objects. In particular, I can say, go ahead and allow the owner. And if I just specify this right here, this means that if you are signed into my application, then you can create, read, update, and delete all of your data, which you don't have any access to even read someone else's. Now, that's not quite what I want. It's pretty close. So I'm going to add on one more rule here. And I'm going to say allow private. Owner refers to someone who's logged in messing with their data. Private refers to someone who's just logged in. Well, what are some of the operations that they can do? They can create, they can read, and I'm not going to let them update or delete any of someone else's data. But again, if they're the owner, they can do whatever they want with their own. It's looking pretty good to me. So from here, I'm going to head back into my terminal. Clear this out. And I'm going to run Amplify Push. Take this local code that I created and push it up to AWS for me. Now, just to make sure, it's going to tell me exactly what's going to be created here, or what I've configured. Looks right. I created an API, and I created an auth category. Do you want to continue? Yes, I do. Now, here's the cool part. It's like, well, we're going to push this up, and you already told us all about your data. Do you want us to just automatically create all those CRUD operations for you? And I'm like, yes, please do. I've messed up 10 times in this demonstration already. Great. Do you want that in JavaScript, TypeScript, Flow? JavaScript is great for me. And it's even going to let me specify exactly where I want it. And this pattern works fine for me. Great. Now, the best thing is that I've mentioned it gives me the ability to create, read, update, and delete. What I didn't mention is that it automatically gives me subscriptions as well. So that way, when I fire off a change, anyone who's currently on my application will receive notification of that, AKA chat apps become a thing, real-time events. One of our customers is Taco Bell, which is kind of cool. And they have a delivery application that shares their driver's location. So that way it's basically like Uber for Taco Bell or Grubhub. Now, GraphQL has this weird quirk where you can kind of infinitely nest data, which can lead to some bad recursions. We actually consider that for you, and we allow you to set a maximum depth that you want to go. 2 is great, even though we have a pretty flat graph. And that's it. This is going to take 2-3 minutes, which I understand from like a web developer perspective is forever. We're used to things being super lightning fast, but at the same time, I can also appreciate the fact that if I had to do this myself, I definitely would not be able to explain it or do it all at the same time within an entire hour. So if you ever had to configure AWS services and hook them all together, it's tough. And I don't mean that from like a get away from AWS perspective. What I mean is that we're very secure. So we have a principle known as deny by default, which means it's not going to let you have access unless you explicitly tell it to have access. And then also least privilege, meaning this should be configured in a way so that it can only do the bare minimum of what it needs to do. Now, there's a lot of terms that get thrown out when it comes to AWS, especially around security. But I think the one that you should probably understand from the get-go is that everything that I'm talking about relating to security is surrounding this principle known as least privilege, or I'm sorry, known as shared responsibility. what that means is AWS will make sure that your code is secure of the cloud. So it takes care of the cloud for you. You don't have to worry about anyone breaking into AWS itself. Now, the flip side of that is that you are in charge of keeping your data secure. So how we like to say that is AWS manages security of the cloud. It's our responsibility to manage security while we're in the cloud itself. So yeah, no one can break into your account unless you gave them your password. No one can access our API unless we made it very easy by giving them the API key or things like that. So I'm going to do his thing for just a couple more moments. Let me check out the chat here. And while I'm doing this, Scott, have you keeping your eyes on anything that should?
Yeah, actually, so Peyton brought up a good, shout out to Peyton, by the way, him and I work together. And I don't know, I'm sorry if I missed it. Have you set up, so you went through the GraphQL portion. Have we actually gotten to the database portion yet?
Yes, that is line 2, all 6 characters.
So the question comes, basically, what are some of the default database table restrictions created with the app model directive?
Oh, very good question. By default, AppSync and DynamoDB work in tandem. It's essentially a one-to-one. Here's the data that you have. I'm just going to dump that inside of the database. It works very much so in this sense. It's very limited, like local storage or MongoDB. But if you have sort of experience with AWS, which it sounds like this person does, then you know that you can have things like indices and primary keys and global secondary indexes and all that stuff. We actually give you the ability to manage all of that yourself through the use of this @key. And if I were to specify this, that I can also give it a name, and this key is going to relate a global secondary index, which basically gives me the way to flip the table on its head and say, yeah, we have unique IDs automatically generated for us, but I actually want to look at my users by to-do titles because those might be unique as well, or something like that. Good question.
And then Carmina had asked the question, I kind of answered it in the chat, of just like, how long would this to do by hand, essentially? I'm like, it took a long time. I mean, especially like when you're doing like, you know, off-N, off-Z configurations, like, especially like when you start talking about like Facebook and Google and, you know, some of these other OAuth providers. And so it can be, if you know what you're doing, it can take a couple of hours. If it's the first time through, or if like you're not, that's not your primary discipline, but you want the functionality, it would take, you know, it would take a really long time. So
yeah,
majorly heavy lifts in here for sure.
Definitely.
And then since it's still building, oh, it finished building. I just want to make one quick note about GraphQL. We could spend an entire session talking about GraphQL. You know, folks, most folks who just got in this industry are used to like what we consider REST API, and REST API is actually this whole other like conceptual architectural concept, but you probably have not lived through the transition from SOAP to REST. But we are kind of working from this transition to REST to GraphQL is kind of like the next thing that's on the horizon for how clients and servers communicate with each other. So it's super cool. But you know, if you're hopping into this tonight, you're like, what the hell is this GraphQL thing? Just keep in mind that really what GraphQL's purpose and what it's serving right now is just this communication between client and server. And you should definitely check it out. I actually should probably just schedule that as an Aftercamp meetup as to talk GraphQL. All right, I'll shut up.
Let me know.
Yeah.
So far, we've actually just been focusing on our backend. If you remember over in app.js, this is just regular React code and nothing about AWS so far. Now, cool, we have this schema file that was created, but we never really tied the two together. There's no way for our front end to actually communicate with all these cool backend services that we created. Now, I do want to emphasize, as we are pushing this up to AWS, we can actually log into our account, change, manipulate, do whatever we want to these services as we normally would. This is just facilitating creating them, but we still have full access to modify them at will. So let's go ahead and tie the two together. the first thing we want to do is install some packages. The first one is going to be AWS Amplify. And you're like, Michael, we already did. Well, the first one was a CLI, so that way we can run these cool commands. This one is going to live inside of our project, so that way we can have our front end talk to our back end. But I also set up authentication, and I definitely see from my CSS skills, don't want to spend this talk trying to create a login screen. So I'm going to go ahead and bring in some units that are already created for me. I come from @AWS Amplify /UI, and I could specify the view. I could say Angular, but in my case, we're in React. The packages are going to install, do their thing. And while that's cooking, I'm going to go ahead and configure this and tie it all together. Let's put that aside. And I want to show you just what got created when we ran that push command. Because as I mentioned, GraphQL folder got created. And we also have mutations, queries, and subscriptions that have been generated for us. So here are the queries. I have the ability to get a to-do. And again, if GraphQL is new to you, don't worry, we'll cover this. But just note that it created all these extra fields that I didn't even have to specify. My to-dos will automatically have an ID, created at, updated at, as well as who's the owner, who's the person who created this, in addition to the ones that I already specified, like title, description, and tags. Listing is available for us. For mutations, we also have all of our ability to create, update, and delete. And I am going to turn off my notifications. I am so sorry. And then we also have subscriptions, which again is WebSocket support. So I can say notify me in my application every time a to-do was created, updated, or deleted. So let's go ahead and play around with some of these. And as I mentioned, the first thing I want to do is tie this together. So I'm going to Amplify from a library that I just installed. And I'm also going to bring in this grayed out file here. And it's grayed out because it's in ignore. It contains a lot of secrets for my application. A lot of secrets. Essentially everything that you don't want pushed out onto the web and that you don't want on a live stream is right here. Now, don't worry. I'm going to go ahead and delete all of this once we're done. But just note that I have access to things like my minimum password length, any password policy characters, what region am I working in? We talked about that earlier. It's going to be living inside of here. So I want to go ahead and tie these two together. And the way though is by importing Amplify and importing that config. I'm just going to call it config from // and then AWS exports. Now amplify.configure is all I need to do to tie these two together. Now my front end has access to all of my backend resources, and I can use these modules and libraries appropriately. I think the very first thing we should do is have the ability to save a to-do. And that'll probably take place whenever someone clicks on this add to-do button right here. So I'll say on click. That's going to equal a handle add to-do function. I haven't found that yet, so let's go ahead and get that taken care of. Handle add to-do. I'm going to make it asynchronous. Async. We can refactor if we need to. So handle add to, and that is going to do a couple things. I'm going to need a title and description. Now here's a cool little trick I like to use, which if I need a title, instead of creating a form for it, I'm just going to say window.prompt. And we'll say enter a title. We'll duplicate that, grab the next titles and switch it to description. So we'll have the window prompt us to enter a title and a description. And we'll go ahead and store those in state. So I'll say use state. And that should have imported it above. Yep. And now I can go into right over here. So I'll say const to-dos and have the ability to set those to-dos. That's going to come from useState. Be an object. I'm pretty sure that object is going to have a title, which is going to be a string, and a description. And I know that because over in my schema, that's exactly what I told it should be. So another benefit of GraphQL is that your schema kind of serves as its source of truth. So there's that. Now, when it comes to adding these, we're going to say, well, go ahead and set my to-dos to be an array of, well, whatever to-dos are currently there. So we'll spread those out. And then go ahead and put this latest to-do right in the beginning, with the to-do and the description right in there. I'm going to save and let my formatter do its thing. And this is still regular React. So when does the GraphQL stuff come into play? Well, I can actually import an API category. AWS Amplify. Now that's going to give me access to call the GraphQL API. But I also need to go ahead and bring in whatever query I'm going to be working with. And in my case, it's going to be from, I believe it's dash GraphQL slash, and then we're mutating because we need that create to do. So how does this work in practice? Well, go ahead and set, and then I'll say API.GraphQL. I'm going to pass it inside of this query object here, my create to do. Now, the next thing it needs is, well, awesome, I can create this to do, but I need some variables to work with. Like, what to do are you creating? Well, the input that you can expect would be this right here, an object, a title, and a description, just like how I did in my state. Now, this returns a promise. So I could say, whoops. Then when you get done, and I'll sort of pause here and just log this out to the screen. So we'll get our data back, rather our response. And we would just log this out for now. So let's do a quick little sanity check to see where we're at. Now, I'm going to skip ahead, and I'm just going to say that this default wouldn't work. And the reason why it wouldn't work, even though I'm pretty sure I write 100% clean code all the time, is because in my schema, I said, hey, you can only do those things. You are the logged in user, or according to this, if you're just someone logged in. I never logged in at all. So here comes the tedious, most applications to create that login screen and sign up flow. And what happens if you forgot your password? I'm actually not going to have to do any of that. I'm just going to, I want to import something from AWS Amplify UI React. And that something is going to be called with Authenticator. And on my end, I'm going to take my entire application and wrap it inside of this with Authenticator. And from there, I'll start my app. I think it's been a little bit since I have started this. So it's going to take all those new packs that I've added since then, rebundle them, do its thing. But once it loads, we should get something pretty cool. But I said that last time and my code broke, so we'll see. Right. I'm at the chat. Oh, what theme am I using? That's the question. I just switched. I always use something known as Scarlet Beta, and now I have one called Moonlight with like the glowy thing that you showed me last time.
Yeah, I like the glowy stuff.
I think this is bumped up a little bit, so it's not that big usually. And look here, I have my application. All I did was just wrap it in with Authenticator, and it gave a sign up screen. Now I can sign in. I don't have an account yet. I have a reset password link. I can create an account, which is what I'm going to do. Give myself a username. Password is password, I think. 1. Same as a bank account. Email address. Send all spam requests there. I'm not going to give you my phone number. I'm just going to do 555-555-5555. Cool. So we got that set up, and it's like confirm sign up. How do I confirm that? Well, I turned off notifications on my laptop. I have to off my phone real quick because I just sent an email. This email contains a verification code, which I did not have to set up. And I'm going to say 07494. Once I click confirm, I'm taken to my application. And that's authentication. Now, notice what's happening here. I don't have the ability to sign out. And that's because Amplify doesn't know where I want my sign out to be. So in addition to a fully managed authentication service, I can actually bring in sort of piece by piece of what I want. You notice what I have here. Auth0 buttons, Amplify chatbot buttons, checkboxes, etc. Typically looking for Amplify sign up. Keeping with the theme of poor CSS, I'm just going to go ahead and put that in a div, and we'll just call it right here. Once I have that imported and switch back, you can see that I have my button right here for us. That works as expected, and I can sign back into my application. Liendo. And there we go. So we have that taking place. A couple minutes left, and we still have to hook up our API. So let's go ahead and do this real quick. We have the ability to handle to-dos that are added. Now we're just logging that out. So let's see what happens here. I'm going to open up my DevTools. Bump this up and bump you up. And when I add a to-do, again, that prompt is going to be here. I'm going to say walk the dog. Because he's antsy. He is. And oh no, it blew up. To-dos is not iterable. What is going on here? Well, let's take a peek. It looks like it's actually breaking on this line. So I never got to my API. And looking like my to-dos is an object. You should probably be an array. There we go. And then this to-do right up here, it looks like I was just kind of leaping ahead. We have our actual to-do data. We have our to-do data here. And yeah, that's looking good. Great. Come here, we'll try it again. We'll just say eat tacos. Oh no, this is actually good because now you can see the check-in that's happening here. And it's like, hey, oh goodness, I've done this presentation 3 times and I always forget this one. It's like, hey, you have something on your schema that you told me is required. It's an array full of strings. Do you have any idea what that could be? And I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Yeah, I should probably make sure that we have these tags here. So let's say tags, you're just going to be an empty array. All right, last time. Yay, we have data. This is going to an actual database in AWS. And you can see here, the next thing to do is to just update our state with this new to-do. And it's actually a very similar method if we wanted to go ahead and read this from our database as well. So instead of a create to do, we would just switch this over to something like list to do. And I know that it's list to do because right over here in my GraphQL folder, sure enough, I have a method called list to do's. So I did want to leave some time for Q&A, but again, I'm going to go ahead and share out this project in the Slack. If you're not a member already, definitely join it. But the last thing to do is to get this up on the web. And to do so, I'm going to say Amplify Add Hosting. Now, a couple of things come into play here. It's saying, hey, we have a fully managed hosting service that does all this cool stuff. And it's called Amplify Console. Do you want to use that? Or if you are used to having things like a backend developer would with Front and S3, you can absolutely use that as well. I'm going to use this new fancy one. And now from here, there's two things that can take place. I can either have continuous deployment with Git, or I can have manual deployment. The difference is if this is on GitHub, every time I push a commit up to GitHub, it'll automatically kick off a new build. Manual deployment is just what it seems. It will only build when I tell it to. I don't have GitHub yet, so I'm going to say manual. Awesome. Hosting was added. So then Amplify Publish is what I need. Just like before, it's going to go ahead and verify everything that I have inside of my application. And then just ask me if I want to go ahead and continue. Yes, I do.
Kids make it better.
Oh my goodness. And then he's going to go ahead and or it's going to go ahead and kick off the service. I can't even think now.
You're good, man. I totally get it.
I used to be like raw the room.
Yeah.
And then with quarantine life, I was like, I have a new rule. It's called he lives here. And
yep, we will too.
yeah. So this is the presentation. Let me go ahead and stop sharing. And then I see Rachel shared the link to the Slack group. Definitely join it. Like I said, and push this repo out there. But if you are interested in doing this in Rest, I have that video up on my YouTube. I'm going to go ahead and share that in Slack as well. If reading is your thing, I have a blog post doing just that. Really take your flavor.
Awesome, Michael. Thank you so much, man.
Oh yeah, for sure. Any questions?
Yeah, let's pause. You got questions? Feel free to chime in.
Yeah, Ben here. Yeah, so I had a question about some of the automated generated properties that are coming from the system there. You had like stuff like updated on, and you know, they're very useful and stuff like that. But how does that like integrate with like say with like TypeScript and those models differing from your schema in the front end? Like mapping that out. Are those just lost in transition? Are those all like actually in the database? Are they accessible? Or how's that going to interact when you're actually trying to reach those properties? Not
Yeah, so the cool thing is that if they're in TypeScript, Amplify actually comes with type definitions. So your autocomplete is going to be working just fine.
awesome. Tab my way to victory.
Yeah.
Until you import the wrong thing that's same named the exact same and figure out that you did that. Yeah.
Yeah, fun times. Great question. Any other questions?
There was another one right below that about the login screen. You know, we were kind of going back and forth about generic solutions, and you know, if our designers would only allow that to go through. Is there a way to restyle those pages, like the login page, and like easy way to, you know, like kind of customize that? Because having all that functionality out of the box is just mind blowing. Like that's yeah. I actually just got done creating a login component, you know, for just, you know, brushing up. I was like, yep, I have to make another one of these. Let's go, you know, like.
Couldn't be me. Yeah. So that component that I showed you, the without that component, it comes with a way for you to style the colors of it. So you can make that brand specific. But the cool thing, dive as close to the metal as you want. So just how you saw me pull off different methods from the API category, or when I brought in different it's from the React component library. You can do the same thing with that auth category. You can not use it at all. You can use bits and pieces of it. And then, of course, if you don't use it at all and you're just using the underlying methods, that means you're basically in headless mode. You can UI look however you want.
Amazing. Yeah, because definitely get the design specifics, especially for, as any type of form, form validation. Hey, this should interrupt this. Of course, it's going to be not standardized. Of course, it's just going to be how we feel it should be right now. Good stuff.
Thank you. Thank you. Others?
Yeah, it seems like Amplify takes a lot of the connecting different AWS pieces and automates it for you. Where do you then find all of them in your console if you want to have a little more hand in managing it?
Very good question. Amplify status will show you what is currently what services you have deployed, but oftentimes you want to get deeper than that, right? What if something breaks and you need to look at a specific Lambda? You need to check out what's happening there. If you run Amplify Console, it takes you to the AWS console, which showcases all the different cloud formation steps that I've taken and which services were actually affected. So a good example of that is I had an email get sent to me with a code when a user signed in. Well, that requires another service known as SNS. And you wouldn't know that from just using Amplify, but when you type in Amplify Console, it'll show you that that was in fact created.
Thank you.
Just a quick note on this too. Looking at like the agency space and working with clients and like, really like developing estimates and, we sit down with the client and say, okay, you want us to produce X, it's going to cost you this much to produce X. One of the things that we would use Amplify for would be like, hey, especially, software, custom software, usually is like 80% the same thing else and then 20% actual customization. So we really like to position Amplify as a way to like be a huge cost saver, to like help clients be like, well, here's some trade-offs. Like, if we did a little less customization, we kind of took what, like how important are some of these things to your design or whatever. It was a huge, like frankly, cost saver. Like actually, as Peyton brought up too, like, I think if I have to make another login screen, like I might go insane. Like, right. Like I actually, like, I like literally don't know how many login screens I've created in my career. But it comes up, right? These things come up often, and really like solutions like Amplify are really awesome for providing like instant value to clients and being like, hey, we can get you up and running really quick with Amplify and focus on the more important stuff, like the stuff that's specific to your needs. So it's super cool. We use it professionally all the time.
One of the points that often comes up that I'm surprised hasn't come up yet is cost, right? How much is this actually costing? And there's a couple of things to consider there. So cost is always in conjunction with value. And one of the things that something like Roku would have, again, Auth, but I think if you use before, you're used to the concept of dinos or dinos or however they're pronounced. And that's essentially where your website takes a little bit to load based off of what kind of usage plan you have. What we built today is completely serverless. It's going to run the same whether you have 10 customers or 10 million. And as far as cost is concerned, because it's serverless, when no one is using your application, you're not paying for it. And it still boots up right away. For what we built today, if I were to have 50,000 customers on my application, I would be paying $6.30. And that is only if I were to be using, which are those real-time feeds. The actual site host is, I'm actually billed per penny. So every minute is $1 penny, and that's only being charged whenever I rebuild my application. And then as far as the invocations, Lambda is 10 cents for every million. Wave of hand, because we actually just reduced the pricing long ago. DynamoDB charges per gigabyte, and we're not storing gigs of to-dos. I can tell you that. And then my big disclaimer is, I mean, if that's too much money for you, after 50,000 customers, hopefully you have some kind of pricing model in the works.
Yeah, we need to have a business conversation after that. If you have 50,000 users and you're not making money, we'll have an Aftercamp meetup for that.
Yeah.
All right. Hey, Michael, thank you so much for coming out and hosting. I want to be respectful of your time and let you get back to the kiddos, get back to mine too. Just as we wrap up here real quick, I think in a couple of weeks, 2 weeks to be exact, we're covering Docker and Kubernetes. Friends, I'm going to start at the really basics here. Like we're going to talk like how an operating system a computer, because it's really important. So like if you are looking at some of this infrastructure as a service, containerization, orchestration, this would be a good one to catch, because like I'm going to strip it really down, and we're not even going to get into like the actual like, we'll get into a little bit of like actually using Docker and Kubernetes, but I just want to explain conceptually what the hell it is, and then we'll get some basics, basic Docker and Kubernetes instances running. So we'll see you in a couple of weeks. Thank you all so much. Hit us up in Slack. Have a great night, everybody. Thank you, Michael.
Later.
Adios.